Hello, my name is Michael Lambert, and today I want to talk a little bit about the economy because, between you and me, it's not doing too well. In fact, it's pretty dire, it's pretty desperate, and things are going to get a lot worse. I think in the next 6 months and this coming winter, and for the next few years, it's going to be very, very, very difficult. And there's no way to see to find any optimism at all as to how things might be turned around, given the attitude of the current government and the opposition, for that matter. We are on a downward trajectory, and it's really quite worrying. Before I do that, though, there's just something else I'd like to say, which is concerns Brexit, and it concerns why people actually voted for Brexit. And you tend to think that people are reasonably, most people are reasonably sensible, and there are enough sensible ones to cancel out all the stupid ones. But I watched Question Time last night. Now, for anybody who's not in the UK, Question Time is a panel discussion show with a lot of audience participation. It goes around the country. And yesterday it came from Clacton, which is a seaside village in Essex. And it's a slightly run-down sort of town. It's a lot of retired people there. The audience for this particular session was made up of people who had voted to leave the EU in 2016, all pro-Brexit. They were, I would say, almost exclusively white, about 150 people, almost exclusively white, mostly men, mostly overweight, mostly over about 50 years of age. In other words, the sort of fat old English men. And I suppose they were the typical of that sort of town. But Two contributions from the audience did stand out particularly, and they were quite enlightening, I thought. One man, he said he had personally seen asylum seekers arriving in boats. He saw a man get off a boat and go straight to the benefits office to claim benefits. He was illustrating, I think, how it is that in his view, and no doubt the view of lots and lots of people, that what asylum seekers come here for is to go to our benefits office and claim money from the government. The absurdity of that remark and the fact that it was so ridiculous, but no doubt a lot of the audience and a lot of people watching would have believed him. Seemed quite extraordinary, but he did symbolise the people who sort of hate immigrants. Another woman in the audience said that she explained the reason she'd had voted to leave the EU, to Brexit, as she said. She said that the EU bring in regulations from time to time, and they brought in one which required firms working on roofs to erect temporary scaffolding to protect the workers. And she said, whilst in the UK we tend to obey these rules, in her words, if you go to places like France and Germany, they don't take any notice. And this, she said, was very unfair. And that was why she'd voted for Brexit. And whether it was or not, I don't know, but probably it was something similar to that. That would be a similar reason why she'd voted for Brexit. And no doubt that applied to a lot of people in that audience, people who were misinformed, who were ignorant, who were stupid, and who no doubt got a lot of their news from newspapers like the Day Express and the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror and so on. And it brought it home to me just how easy it must have been for the likes of Farage and Johnson to gather this sort of voting fodder by preaching all this complete and utter garbage and how we're all paying for this stupidity. But anyway, that's my Brexit rant for this thing. I want to talk about the economy. Now, forget about all the hype, the government hype. The government hype tends to be along the lines that we're going to have a new Silicon Valley, we're going to have 12 new Canary Wharfs, we're going to be a technology superpower, and et cetera, and also if things are bad here, they're worse everywhere else, much worse than Zimbabwe. Everything's worse everywhere else, and it's nothing to do with what the government are doing. No, if things are going wrong, the reason that we're doing worse than everybody else is because of COVID. It's because of Putin. That's why we're doing worse there. Nothing is to do with Brexit. Brexit has had no negative effect on the economy whatsoever. And people are so gentle about it, so careful about it. We hear discussions. People say, well, Brexit might have had a little bit of an effect. You could possibly consider, but it's a bit difficult to say and so on. Brexit is very largely responsible for the mess that we're in at the moment. But just listen to this lot. Exports are forecast to be down 100 billion. That's 40 billion in tax take. That's the whichever it is of the OBR. We've got no new trade deals, really, apart from the miserable deals in Australia and New Zealand. Kemi Badenoch, who is now our trade secretary, she said she's off trying to do deals with the CPTPP, and she says that one of the reasons our exports are not up is because Remainers keep talking them down. So, I don't know, ICI can't export chemicals because I complain about Brexit. Is that it? I don't know. Our inward investments is Clacton. People are not coming to invest in the UK. I mean, why would they? We had time after time people say it's too complicated. It's easy to be in Europe. It's easy to be in Ireland. Firms have moved to the EU. Thousands of firms have moved to the EU. And as I say, new firms coming in. Why would you settle in the UK if you can settle in the EU? We've at the moment got the highest taxation we've had since the Second World War. We've got the lowest state pensions in Europe. We've experienced the biggest fall in living standards since the 1950s. We've got massive inflation. We have the highest rate of inflation in Western Europe. Ours is going up. Everybody else's is going down. And it's going to get worse, the food inflation. We're going to get worse because we're going to have to start imposing import controls in October. Not only that, corporation tax has gone up from 19 to 25%. That will be passed on to customers. So there's more and more and more inflation in the pipeline. And what's the response to all this? This is inflation, whereby prices are getting higher and higher and higher, and where more and more people find it more and more difficult to manage, particularly poor people who are really struggling, people who've got mortgages they can only just pay or maybe can't pay, people who are living off bank loans, people who are living off credit card debts and so on. What do you do to try and cure inflation? You decide to have a recession and you increase interest rates. You just increase them until you get a recession. We've had 13 rate increases in a row. Last week's was for 0.5%. This means that it affects people who are trying to buy houses. A lot of people won't be able to pay the mortgage any longer. Those who will be able to manage, there'll be so many £100 a month worse off, and that's so many £100 a month they're not going to be able to spend in the pub or in the shops or in the cafes or in all the other businesses that are going to suffer as a result. People who businesses that are running on overdrafts, thousands and thousands. Think how many businesses have been struggling the last few years, especially following the pandemic. They're all going to be struggling, and they're going to find they now pay more interest. So what they're going to have to do, they have to cut down, put the prices up. And then people who've got debts they're not going to be able to pay, credit card debts. You know, the stress and the anguish and the suffering, because it's always the poor people that suffer. If you're rich, all this interest rates increase. Don't matter at all, don't matter at all. You've got money in the bank, you get interest. If you paid off your mortgage, what else does it matter to you? You're fine. And this is the mess we're in at the moment. And it's self-inflicted. And not only that, we have such an incompetent government who really have absolutely no idea. We have a Prime Minister who is absolutely, utterly useless. And so the government really now are faced with, what can they do? Can't print money. We know what happens when you print money. It just goes straight into asset inflation. You can't borrow anymore. We're borrowing 100% of GDP now. The highest, I think, since the war. You can't increase taxes. Who you can tax? We've got the highest taxes already. Highest taxes for 50 years or whatever it is. So what do you do? Spending cuts? You can't do spending cuts. What's the government going to do? Now, I want to talk a little bit about Sunak, because, as I say, I think he's completely hopeless. Let me tell you a little bit about his history. We all know he went to Winchester, he went to Oxbridge, and then he went to work for Goldman Sachs or whatever and made lots of money, and then he married an immensely rich woman, so he's got an enormous amount of money. He's vastly wealthy. He got into Parliament in 2015. He's only been in Parliament 8 years. For 3 years he did next to, I think he was a backbencher. Then Theresa May made him a junior minister in I think a housing minister or something. And then when Johnson got rid of May, he put Sunak into the Treasury and a junior ministerial position. And then when Cummings got rid of Sajid Javid, suddenly Sunak was made Chancellor under Johnson. Now, had times been normal, who knows how he would have done, but he happened to become Chancellor at the time, the start of the pandemic, COVID. And so what he had to do was to just give away money to keep businesses going, keep people in employment. So his main job is to give money away. And it's very, very questionable as to how well he did that. The bounce back loan scheme was the biggest fraud, I would have thought, ever, government fraud from businesses. I mean, it was just a question of whoever you are, just fill in a form on the government's website, and we'll put £50,000 in your bank within 2 or 3 days. And thousands, I mean, billions of pounds were lost. He came up with the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which we know spread a lot of deaths and so on. So he wasn't a great success as Chancellor anyway. And now he's Prime Minister. And he's Prime Minister in a party where he's not very popular. He's not popular with his members. He's not very popular with many of the MPs. He's terrified of everybody, and he's hopeless. I mean, he doesn't have that sort of political antenna that so many people have. You know, you think other politicians are really quite sharp; they know what's going on and all the rest of it. He's a little robot, isn't he? I mean, this business with his 5 pledges and how he is like a robot when he repeats them. They have to be in every interview. They have to be included 2 or 3 times. I think in one interview I heard him a few weeks ago, he put in these 5 pledges 5 times in the space of the one interview. It was like the other day he was being asked as to why he wasn't going to go and vote in the debate about Johnson's Privileges Committee findings and so on, and he had a reply. I think it was something along the lines that he didn't want to influence other MPs, and he thought if he was present, it might influence them. Just utterly bizarre. But he had this parrot thing, this robot thing, which he kept saying. And last week he went to Dartford a couple of days ago. He went to an IKEA warehouse and gave a speech to 30 or 40 employees, I suppose. You might have seen it. They were all sat down in rows quite close to him, and they're all wearing high vis and so on. And you've never seen a grumpier crowd. I mean, they look less happy than the defendants in the Nuremberg trials. I mean, they just looked as though they were about to be sentenced to death. And then little Rishi comes in and he's bouncing all about, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And he says, the really good news is this. He says, I want you all to know, to understand that I am 100% on it. And you think to yourself, how can you be so stupid, so insensitive? There are all these 40 people here. They've all just heard that mortgage rates are going to go up. A lot of them have mortgages. A lot of them are worried, sick about how they're going to pay the mortgage. They're probably worried about how they're going to pay next week's groceries. A lot of them had to give up having a holiday this year. All suffering, all worried, all anxious. And there's this man in front of them who could tomorrow morning go out and buy a brand new private airplane for £25 million, and he wouldn't even notice the money. He's got so much, just wouldn't even barely show up on his bank statement. And he's saying, I'm on it. Don't you worry, you worker people, don't you worry. And it's just that lack of understanding, that lack of, just too far removed. And with his pledges, inflation. He's going to halve inflation. Well, everybody knew that was something that he had no control over, but he will take credit for it. Oh yes, and in fact, now it looks as though it's going to be very difficult for him to do that, for that to happen. Starmer on PMQs this week, he said to him about inflation and so on, and he rather sarcastically, he said something like, perhaps the leader of the opposition doesn't realise that inflation is a global problem. If it had come down, it would have been his problem. He would have solved. And of course, his second and third pledges, that is to grow the economy and reduce the debt. I mean, those both are dependent upon inflation anyway. And this thing about, You see, when I said before about how government, they can't print money, they can't borrow money, they can't increase taxes, there's only one way, and it's not something that can be done quickly, it's going to be mid-term or long-term. There's only one way you'll make the money to pay for all the things we need to pay for, and that is by expanding the economy. This is just one of his 5 pledges: grow the economy. Yeah, how? How are you going to do it? What are your plans? Why are you not focusing totally on that? Why is that an absolute obsession, how we get business going? But no, it's just one of his pledges on his list. Starmer's is bad. Starmer, in fact, even worse. He is going to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. We are, as I said before, an absolute basket case. So many problems, doing so badly, struggling so hard, recession coming, etc., etc., etc. Once Starmer's in place next year, he's going to make us faster growing than America, faster growing than Japan or Germany, Italy, Spain, France or Canada. We're going to be faster, sustained growth. Every year we're going to grow bigger than any of those big mighty. How, Keir? How? What are you going to do? I never have any plans about technical colleges, about training, about teaching science and all the rest of it, and all these things that are necessary, any sort of policy, any plans about how it's all going to happen and how it's going to take a long time. I never hear people talk about investing in business and how important it is to be able to flood people with startup capital, small amounts of money to get businesses off the ground. No. It's very, very difficult. You have a job to raise any money anywhere. It's I've said before, it's like me saying I'm gonna get very rich by winning the lottery. You have to have plans, and the centre of the plan always has to be getting the economy going. And until people wake up to that, until first of all somebody gets up and says Brexit was an absolute disaster, it has wrecked our company, it is destroying the country, and as long as we persist with it, or persist with trying to make it work, we're going to go down and down and down until somebody comes and says that, until somebody else gets up and says, or the same person gets up and says, we have to focus on business, on generating new business and sustaining businesses and encouraging business and helping business, because that is the only way we're going to survive or ever even begin to recover. And we've got such a long way to go to get back to where we started from when we left the EU. So it's not looking very good. And I think with the attitudes of the current government and to a certain extent or to a large extent the opposition, the Labour Party, we're going to have to suffer a lot more. We're going to have to get to the bottom before we come to our senses, I think. But anyway, that's what I think about it. And if you've watched this far, thank you very much indeed. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd appreciate if you would do so. And until next week, bye for now.